What happens when a nerd with terrible impulse control gets into home servers? Well, they go a little overboard. Okay, I don't really want to do the entire video with this thing on the table, so So what that was my brand new home server, and I know I just did multiple videos on my now old home server, which was actually working pretty well, but I needed an upgrade. Not necessarily needed, I wanted an upgrade. So let me preface this by saying the parts that are in this thing are not what I would recommend to basically anybody building a home server. So with that said, let me go through the parts, and after I will justify why I bought them and why I'm not recommending that to you. So for the processor, we went with an EPYC 7302 from AMD. This is a 16-core, 32-thread processor with 128 lanes of PCI Gen 4 compatibility. Now, right off the bat, that's overkill. The base clock is 3 gigahertz, and it can boost up to 3.3 and has a total TDP of 155 watts. For the motherboard, we went with an ASRock Rome D8 2T. Now, this is probably my favorite part of the build, even more so than the EPYC processor, because this thing has every feature you can imagine. This thing has 7 PCI Gen 4 16x slots, 2 10 gigabit LAN ports, as well as another LAN port for IPMI. It's got 8 channel RAM, so not dual channel, not quad channel, but 8 channels. For inputs, it's also got 2 mini SAS connectors for up to 8 SATA drives. It's got 2 NVMe PCI Gen 4.0 slots, as well as 2 OcuSync slots. Now, I'm not super familiar with OcuSync, and after doing a bit of research on it, I'm not a fan, honestly. There's not really much you can do with it. I know the general consensus is to use it for U.2 drives, which is kind of more of an enterprise standard that's kind of taking off these days, but I'm not really utilizing them, so Now, along with all of that, it also has dedicated onboard video, which I think is an underrated feature because with that, you no longer have to utilize a dedicated graphics card, meaning that you don't have to waste 8 or 16 PCIe slots. Housing everything is a Fractal Meshify 2 XL. Now, I could have gotten by with the non-XL version, but I was kind of scared that I was not going to be able to fit everything in the regular version. Turns out the XL is ginormous. I actually like it because of one basic feature is that there's extra PCI slots underneath the last slot for the motherboard. So in normal cases, the last slot of your motherboard is only going to be able to house a single slot card because you physically don't have room in the case, but that's not the case with this case. It has a lot of room, so I'm happy with it. Cooling the processor, I went with Noctua, which is kind of a no-brainer, especially if you're not utilizing a rack mount system, if you're utilizing a standard desktop case. Noctua is going to be your best bet for air cooling. So I went with the Noctua NH-U14S. It's got a 140 millimeter fan and 6 heat pipes, I believe. And this thing has been knocking it out of the park. With everything I've been doing with the processor, I don't think I've seen the processor get over 50 degrees. For RAM, I have 128 gigabytes of DDR4 1400 megahertz, and that is ECC. It's one of the main reasons why I upgraded. ECC is crucial in a server environment where it performs error checking on itself. So in the event that you have kind of an error with your RAM, it'll self-correct and you won't get crashes. Now I'm actually utilizing all 8 channels on the motherboard because I'm running 8 16 gigabyte sticks of Samsung, DDR4 standard ECC memory. For the boot drive, I went with a 2 terabyte Silicon Power NVMe drive. Now, it is Gen 3, and I do regret going Gen 3, but Gen 4 drives are, just so much more expensive right now, and I'd already spent so much more money than I wanted to on the motherboard, RAM, processor, and the hard drives, which I'm about to get to. But if I could go back, I'd probably splurge for the Gen 4 NVMe, simply because this is housing all my VMs, and the more random I/O speed you can get from a drive, the better. Now, hard drives. One of the main reasons why I upgraded was because I wanted a crap ton of hard drive storage. I wanted to never care about storing data or running out of capacity ever again. So I went with 4 12 terabyte Western Digital HGST Helium Enterprise drives. Yeah, 4 12 terabytes, that's 48 terabytes total. And while that doesn't sound like a lot for a server, that's a lot for me. I mean, I'm basically the only one utilizing this, so that's plenty enough. Now, while I do have 48 terabytes of physical storage, I'm actually running, I'm using ZFS and running its equivalent of a RAID 10, meaning that 2 drives are mirrored copies of each other in RAID 1, the other 2 drives are mirrored copies of each other in RAID 1, and then those 2 sets are striped together in RAID 0. So that's how you get the RAID 10. RAID 1, RAID 0. So after all the formatting and everything, I come out with about 21 terabytes, which is perfectly fine with me. It's enough storage. It's a good combination of speed with the RAID 0 as well as, I don't want to say backup, but redundancy with the RAID 1. Now, I also have the RTX 2070 in there from my old server, and it still functions as a gaming virtual machine for Windows, and when it's not gaming, I'm actually mining Ethereum with it because why not? Otherwise, it's sitting there collecting dust, and I have 128 PCI lanes to use, so why not? So those are the parts that I went with, and again, I'm not recommending that. That's just what I went with, and let me explain the why part of it now. So what I was running before on my home server was a Ryzen 5 2700. Now, this is a consumer processor, and while it does have 8 cores and 16 threads, it's not really designed to be in a server. And the main reason for this is due to it essentially having only 20 usable PCI Gen 3 lanes. Now, 20 PCI lanes is perfectly fine for a majority of people because, you're gonna put a graphics card in there and pretty much that's it. 16 lanes, you have 4 left over, you're good to go. But in the server environment, you wanna utilize your processor to the max. You wanna fill those PCI lanes up with cards, different, input devices, anything you can throw at it. And 20 lanes just wasn't enough. Now, in my old server, I didn't have onboard video, so I had to immediately use a graphics card to get video out of it, which was 8 lanes right off the bat, which then left me with 12. And then I wanted 10 gigabit LAN, so I had to throw another card in there, and that's another 8 lanes. So now I'm down to 4, and 4 isn't really much for expansion. Now I have 128 lanes of PCIe Gen 4, which is a lot. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, well, if you wanted more PCI lanes, why didn't you just go with older Xeon processors for a fraction of the cost? And I almost did. And that, honestly, is what I would recommend to 99.9% of people out there, because there's just no beating the price to performance of those Xeon processors. You can go on eBay and get 2 Xeon 2697s for $100 each, and those are 12-core, 24-thread processors that go up to, I think, 3.5 gigahertz, and you get about 48 PCI lanes each with those, so that's plenty. And honestly, that's the best bang for buck out there. Pair that with a dual socket, X79 motherboard and ECC DDR3 RAM, and I would have saved $800 to $1,000 going that route. So why didn't I do that? Basically because when I get into a hobby, and especially with technology, I like to future-proof things. I like to have the peace of mind of knowing that the purchase I made will last for years to come. And that's the main reason why I'm shooting this video on a Sony a7S III and why I take photos on a Sony a7R IV. It's just preference. Another reason kind of why is I wanted to limit the amount of heat and energy used as much as possible. So while the EPYC processor is, 155 watt TDP, each one of those Xeon processors will run about 130 watts each. So you're looking at about 100 plus more watts just on the processors for going with those Xeons. Now, if you're running, an actual server in a server room, rack mounted, away from you where you don't have to worry about noise or heat, that wouldn't be an issue. But this is running in my house, in a living room. So noise and heat was actually a big factor. So that's my build, and I'm extremely happy with it. The processor is leaps and bounds better than what I was running before. I just ran some simple Cinebench runs, and I'll post those results somewhere, probably covering my face. But it runs as expected from a top tier AMD server grade processor. Now I do plan on doing a follow-up video where I talk about the software that I'm running on my home server because that's changed a good bit from what I was running before, basically because I have a lot more horsepower now and I have more reins to do some cooler things. So be on the lookout for that video. But if you like this video, be sure to drop a like. If you're running a home server at home, comment below. I'm pretty interested in what kind of hardware you guys are running as well as software. Personally, I'm running Proxmox, so if you're running Proxmox as well, let me know what you're using it for. But that's basically all I have for you today, and I'll see y'all in the next one.